Hey everybody, and welcome back to the second video in OpnSense. We've got a lot to get through in this video, so go grab a drink and let's get right into it. Today we're going to be covering backups and restore, static IPs, services, how to create a new network, and also bridge things like a Wi-Fi network, create a VLAN, add some DHCP, create our first firewall rule, give a demo of a VLAN splitting VMs and how it will block traffic, Dynamic DNS, VPNs, WireGuard in, and also VPN out. That's right, we can route an entire subnet over a VPN. And finally, we're going to have a look at traffic inspection. So if you watched my first video, you should have OpnSense up and running now. And your setup is probably similar to an ISP router in modem-only mode, if possible, into the WAN port of your OpnSense, and then ideally a switch into the LAN port. And we'll be building on that in this video with all of the features I've just mentioned. And on top of that, you might want to go and get yourself an access point for Wi-Fi, because if you're connecting to your existing ISP modem, that's in front of the firewall, not behind it. So any traffic will not be protected. In terms of access points, I always opt for Ubiquiti. They've been rock solid for me for about 6 or 7 years now, and I'll drop a link in the comments below if you want to go and check those out. Do bear in mind that if you're not running one of their gateways, things like a Unifi, you will need to spin up the Unifi controller if you want to be able to manage this easily through a computer. There are mobile apps, but it's better through the desktop. So let's jump straight back into OpnSense and let's work our way through all of these features. Okay, so this isn't OpnSense, but it's important because I've set up 2 virtual machines here, VM1 and VM2, that are handily named OpnSense. And I'm going to be using these VMs for up-and-coming testing for things like static IPs, firewall rules, VLANs, etc. So hopping over into OpnSense, the first thing we probably want to do is save our retinas. So to do that, we head to System, and then we go down to Firmware, then we go down to Plugins, and handily there are a few dark modes in here. So the one I'm going to choose is Rebellion, and I'm just going to click Install. Now, once you've installed it, you need to enable it. So to do that, you need to head into Settings, and then you need to go to General, and you need to choose the theme Rebellion here. And once you've applied that, hit Save, and you're good to go. So now you can see that we've got something that's much better on our eyes. So now let's get into the things that actually matter. So the first thing to get on with is to create a host. Now, if you remember in my Sophos XG videos, this is basically creating a host based upon a MAC address so that we can specify this within rules. So you've got a friendly reminder in those drop downs. So for example, I could now choose OpnSense VM1 and it would relate to that machine. So to do that, we need to head into Firewall and then we need to hit Aliases. Now in here, there's a load that are already created from the default installation. But you'll notice that the handy little plus just over here. So if we hit plus, we get plenty of options for what we want to create. So from this menu, I'm going to leave it on the default hosts, but as you can see, there are lots of other different options you could choose in here for creating an alias. So for the name, I'm going to call it OpnSense VM1. It doesn't like special characters, so get rid of the hyphen, and I'm going to hit save. So now that's created, you need to click apply. And then hopefully we should be able to see that if we do a search. So OpnSense should find it. Yeah, and there we go. We've got the name OpnSense and it's of type host. So I'm going to create another one and it's going to be OpnSense 2. And then I'm also going to hit save. And I'm going to hit apply. And then we've got both of those here. So that's great. Next, we probably want to tie that to a DHCP lease. Now, as you can tell on mine, I've already got the 2 LAN and WAN interfaces, which is the default. And I've actually got 3 because I pass through 3 because I want to use one of those for high availability. And you can actually see those if you go into assignment and then hit one of these drop downs. You'll see that I've got VNet 0, 1 and 2, and we're only using at the moment, I think, 1, so we're not using 2. We'll come on to that in the next video. So now that we've got our host created, we could also create some services if we wanted to. But if we head into DHCP v4 and we go to the leases, or you can actually just click on the interface you want. And then at the bottom, so this is by default already here, we can scroll down to the bottom, and behind my ugly mug is an orange plus just down there to the bottom right. And if we click that, we get the option to create a static lease. So what I'm going to do is head back into my Proxmox, and I'm on my 2 VMs I created. So now if I click on one of the hardware tabs, and I can then click on the network interface here, you can see, and if I hit edit, we can just double click this MAC address, copy it, and then back in OpnSense, I can paste it here. And now for the IP address of that, I'm going to create something new. So for the IP address, I'm just going to put 192.168.1.40. So that is on the existing LAN. And as you can see from the top, I'm on 168.1.1. That's the firewall. In a moment, we're going to create a new VLAN. And for the second VM, I'm going to place it on that VLAN. And that's going to do a few things. Firstly, it's going to show us how to create VLANs. And we're also going to use it for creating our static mapping like we're doing here. And then I'm going to show you how it's going to be default blocked by being on a different network. And then we'll create a firewall rule to make sure that those can communicate again. And then we'll delete the rule or change it to a block so they can't. So that's now specified. We should be able to hit save. So now that's saved, we need to click apply. And then with any luck, we should be able to scroll to the bottom now, and we can see that we've got a lease here. So perfect. So that MAC address is going to receive this IP address. So with any luck, we should be able to now go into Proxmox, and we should be able to start this virtual machine. And hopefully when it's booted up, we should see the 1.40 IP address. This is going to pull a few updates, so I'll see you in a moment when it's completed. And hopefully if I log in now, we should see the IP address. And yes, excellent, we do. 192.168.1.40. And that's because over here, we've got this static lease based upon its MAC address. Excellent. So the next item on the list is to do a VLAN now. So how do we create a VLAN? Well, it's actually a little bit more involved than Sophos. So to create a VLAN, there's a few things we need to do. So over on interfaces, we need to go down to other type. And you guessed it, a VLAN. So let's create a VLAN. And I'm just going to call this one VLAN 40. And that's just because I'm going to use the .40 range for some of this testing. Now, the parent is the NIC you want to put this on. And as you've seen, I've already showed you I've got 3. But for this one, we're going to put the VLAN on the default LAN. And that's probably the most common setup for this if you're just using a virtualized setup. Now, this VLAN is going to have a VLAN tag of 40. And that's all we need to change for this. You can give it a description if you want. That might be helpful. So hit save and then hit apply. But that's not actually enabled. There's a few more things we need to do. So the next thing we need to do is we've created the VLAN. We need to give it an assignment. So here you can see there's 2. And you'll see here defaultly populated is this new interface we created. So this is a virtual interface, VLAN 0.4 in my case. And we want to click add. Once we click add, it comes up here and you can see it's opt1. So now that we've added that, we can click on it, and the important thing is we click enable the interface. When we click enable, a load more options come up down here. And now that we have those options available, we need to put something in here so that we can enable DHCP and also so that it knows what the network range is. So as I've given mine .40, I'm going to create the following network range. It's going to be a static IPv4, and the IP range is going to be 192.168.40.1, and I'm going to make it a /24. So that'll be your familiar .1 to .255. Once I've done that, I'm going to click Save and Apply. And now, with any luck, if we go into the services, under DHCP v4, we should now have opt1. So, much like we have for the LAN, where I put a reserve space in here, so I've got here, the range is 10 to 245. You can choose whatever you want in that range. I'm then going to go into opt1, and I'm going to create a range that's somewhat similar. So 192.168.40.10, and then I can do 192.168.40, and then I'll do 245. So now that's set, we probably want to put the gateway in, so 192.168.40.1, and then everything else should be able to stay the same. It's probably a good idea to put the DNS server in if you want to. So in here, I'm going to put my pi hole, and I'm also going to put my backup pi hole, and I recommend you do the same for whatever internal DNS resolver you're using. So now that's populated, we should be able to hit save. And so now we've done that, we can add another static map. So down here, the DHCP static mappings, we're going to hit the plus, and we're going to copy the MAC address from the second machine. So OpnSense here, VM2. I'm going to go to the hardware, double click this, copy the MAC address, and then I'm going to put it into here. And then I'm going to give it an IP address of 192.168.40. And I don't know, let me give it 5 because that's outside the DHCP range. So now that's saved, and we can validate that at the bottom. That's right. We should be in a position now to, in Proxmox, put this with a tag of 40. And fingers crossed, this should be picked up within the firewall when we boot it. So I've edited this machine to have VLAN tag 40 here, and I've saved that, and you can validate that with the tag equals 40 at the end. But on this default setup that I showed in the last video in Proxmox, if we go onto our VM, in my case OpnSense test, we've got a bit of an issue. Now that issue is because none of these network interfaces are VLAN aware. So that means that promiscuous mode isn't enabled, and it doesn't understand that this is going to operate as a trunk. So how do we fix that? Well, as you can see here, I've got VMBR7. So if I go to this host here, so my Proxmox Dell, and I go down to network, and I look at VMBR7, remember, you can see in the comment here, this is my OpnSense LAN, and then if I click edit, I need to say that this is VLAN aware. So when I click VLAN aware, hit OK, it's going to add that it's VLAN aware here in the configuration. Now, this is going to enable it to accept all VLANs, so 2 to 4094. Now, when you apply this, not all cards like this. I've had issues before with some Intel cards whereby that is just too many VLANs for the card to support. I've also had issues with this on my Mellanox 10 gig cards, as I believe it only supports 128 VLANs. I say only, you're not going to need that many VLANs in a home lab, but for an enterprise setup, that could be a concern. So I'm going to hit apply configuration now, yes, and with any luck, we shouldn't get any errors out the back of that. So no, that's done now. And so what that has done is it's created it VLAN aware so that we can plonk now any VLAN onto that network, and OpnSense is going to get that traffic. Now you could actually go onto your Proxmox host via the console or whatever shell you're using and change that within the network settings. And you could change that to be whatever VLANs you want, not the entire range. And it's probably worthwhile doing that. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm not going to bother. Now, when you boot up that VM, you're going to get this error if you haven't tagged the port on your switch. So we need to go and fix that. So I'll show you how to do that with a Unifi switch, but the process is pretty similar no matter which you're using. So within my switch device management page, I've actually got my OpnSense plugged into these 3 ports. So 41 is my WAN, And as I said, I'm running this behind Sophos XG, so it's double firewalled. Your setup, you're not going to have this. This is just for me demonstrating. This should pick up the IP address from your ISP router. Instead, it's picking up an internal IP address, but it's still got access to the internet and all my services. The bit that's important is these two here. Now, this one here, 45, this is the LAN port that goes into my firewall. So typically you would have a dedicated switch hanging off of this port, and 43 is the machine I'm currently on recording this video plugged into the switch. And these two ports here are part of the same VLAN. So here just tagged with 350, and this one is just tagged with 7, which is my development VLAN, and that's why it's picking up a .7 IP address. Anyway, I'm going off topic, let's get back on topic. So to fix this, I need to basically assign these two ports here with VLAN of 40, and then it will be able to pass this tagged traffic to OpnSense. So if I go over to settings and then networks, I want to create a new virtual network. So I'm just going to call this one OpnSense 40. And I'm going to change the router to a third-party gateway because I'm not using a Unifi Dream machine. I'm obviously using OpnSense as the gateway. And I need to add the VLAN tag of 40. You'll have to make sure that this VLAN tag is unique. And then I'm going to click Add. I can now go back to my devices, so back on the switch, go to the port manager. And as I said, it's these two ports here that we need to change. And now I'm going to change the native VLAN again to be my LAN. And I'm then going to do the tagged VLANs to be custom. And I'm going to select the 40. Now you can choose as many as you want here if you want to have more VLANs. So just replicate this process per VLAN. And I'm going to click Save and Apply. And then for my other one, I'm also going to do the same. Because remember, this has to be done on the devices that are connecting to it and also the trunk port. So doing that again for the second one, I'm going to select VLAN 40, hit save, and then apply those changes. So now those are both applied, and hopefully if we go back into Proxmox and we restart this machine, we should be in a good position. And so over now on VM2, we've booted this up, and if we do an IP-A, fingers crossed, yeah, there we go. We've got 40.5, which is what we expected. Now we're going to get onto some firewall rules. And if we familiarize ourselves with what we have in OpnSense, the default LAN configuration allows any traffic to anywhere. It's an any rule. So now, with any luck, we know this is on 40.5, and we know that VM1 is on 1.40, so a different subnet. If we do a ping, so if we want to ping 40.5, remember this is VM2, this should be allowed because we've got an any rule. So let's try that. Yep, there we go. You can see that we're getting multiple pings there. However, we don't have any rules configured yet for the 40 VLAN. So if we run the same command in the second VM and we try to ping 1.40, let's see what happens. We're not getting any traffic. That's because we don't have a rule in place to allow this. So let's jump back into OpnSense and let's put a rule in that's going to allow this traffic. And then hopefully you can use this rule to replicate within your environment to make sure that you can separate all of your traffic. So back on OpnSense, I've gone into firewalls and I've clicked on that LAN interface just to confirm that we've got a default allow LAN to any rule. And that's why that ping is working to the other VLAN. Now, if we go to opt1, which is my other VLAN, you can see that there are no rules currently defined. So that means that traffic is just going to get dropped. So let's create a new rule here where we'll just set this up as any, so that hopefully those pings that we set up earlier, they should automatically then start reaching the LAN interface. So to do that, we're going to hit plus. Then we're going to say pass. Remember, you can have block or reject. So pass means, yep, that's good. We're going to do the interface opt1. So this is inbound traffic and it's allowed any. The source can be from anywhere and the destination can be anywhere. The ports are any. So we're going to hit save. So this should allow now a default allow rule. So now that's created, we've basically got anything can come in, anything can go out. I don't recommend you have a rule like this, but this is just to demonstrate how to create a rule and how to do some of that inter-VLAN routing. You would obviously want to tailor this down, so something like this, albeit you probably want to be more prescriptive as well. And if you created a rule that you weren't happy with, you can hit edit, and then we can go and fix that. So if we jump back into the rule, we can change the source to be the opt1, which is my VLAN in this case. So if we save that now, what we're doing is we're saying that anything on this network can reach anywhere else. So hopefully now we should be able to hop back into Proxmox and see this working. And so now, back on VM2, you can see here, we've got that ping to 1.40 working, and on the VM1, we should still have the ping working. Yeah, there we go. So we've now successfully set up a firewall rule to enable VLAN routing. And just to reiterate, these are overly permissive rules. So we would probably want to restrict these a little bit more. So things like we'd hit edit, and then we change things to be specific protocols. So something like WireGuard, for example, if this was a port forward, we'd come on to that later. You would want to put in the specific protocol, i.e. UDP, the specific port, so 51820, etc. So you want to try and tie these down as much as possible. Now, one other thing you might want to do, and I'm going to come onto this in a future video, is to create a bridge. Now, a bridge is useful if you're using an external access point, because remember, if you're going to use OpnSense as your router, you're probably going to put your ISP in modem only mode, or even if you keep it in router mode, it's still going to be upstream from the OpnSense box, so the networking rules won't apply. So one way you could do that is to set up a bridge, and you can find that in the other types under the interfaces. You could also just create another VLAN, like we did here, and then create a firewall rule which allows all traffic between the two. I prefer this way because it means that I can have a separate IP address space for all of my devices on my wireless LAN and also then on my local LAN. I prefer that way, it makes sense to me, because I might want specific rules even on my trusted network. But if you wanted to create a bridge, and this will be pretty much how your ISP router is set up, so that no matter if you plug in with an Ethernet cable or you connect over the WLAN, you're still going to be on the same subnet. And to do that, you just want to click onto Interfaces, Other Type, and then a bridge, and then click the plus. And what you need to do is select the interfaces you want to create the bridge on. So in this instance, you're going to need it on the LAN because that's our trunk. And then you would select one of your VLANs that you're creating as a Wi-Fi, and you would create a bridge between those. And then you're going to need to specify that bridge in interface. Like I said, I'll come onto that in a later video, but it is possible. So one other really important thing that you'll want to know how to do is port forwarding. And thankfully that's really simple. So firewall, NAT, port forward. And so you can already see here that we've got a port forward enabled for 80 and 443. And this is an anti-lockout rule that's on the LAN address. So what does that mean? Well, this allows anyone externally to access the interface to OpnSense through these ports. Now, if we wanted to create a new one for the internet, so let's say, for example, you're hosting traffic, you've been following my videos, and you've got a service there, you want to click Add. You want the interface to be the WAN. You want it to be IPv4. Now, the protocol, you probably want TCP and UDP, but choose the one that you want to specify. If it's just HTTP traffic and HTTPS, you can get away with TCP. Now, the source, I'm going to leave as any, because I want anyone on the internet to be able to access it. But if you do hit advanced, you can change and restrict some of those. So for example, you might just want to give IP ranges from a given territory, i.e. the UK. Now for the destination, I'm going to set my LAN address, but ideally I would create a new VLAN that was my DMZ, and I would put my proxy on there and I would forward traffic to that. And so here, for example, the destination is going to be on the LAN, and I've got HTTP traffic, so this is going to port forward 80, and then I can add a single host or network. So if I specify a host, I could put OpnSense VM1. Let's just pretend that this is my proxy. Ideally, this will be your Docker VM, or it will be something like your load balanced IP for your traffic reverse proxy if you're running something like Kubernetes. Now, I've said 80 to port 80 here, and it's going to target to that VM. And that should be all you need to change on here. So if I hit save, and after we hit apply, from now on, any traffic that hits the WAN interface with protocols TCP or UDP from anywhere will be redirected to the LAN on port 80 to this machine on this port. And that's pretty much it for creating a port forward. And obviously you would want to create port forwards for all of the services that you're running, and they'll all need to be running on different ports. Now, obviously you can use something like Traffic or another reverse proxy like Nginx, and you could run all of your services through that, or at least the vast majority of them. And all those services will be behind the proxy. So another really useful feature to have on a firewall is dynamic DNS. Now, for anybody who doesn't have a static IP address and wants to self-host, you pretty much need dynamic DNS in place. Otherwise, your A records or your DNS records in, say, your registrar Cloudflare just will not work because they'll be out of date. So handily, we can go over to System, Firmware, Plugins, and download the DD plugin. So if we put in DD, and here you can see the DD client. So if we click on that and hit the install, that'll go away and pull that down. And then we're ready to configure it. Now for this to work, you're going to need to own a domain and have that set up with a domain registrar. So I use Cloudflare because I think they're pretty good and they have a load of features, but there are others that are supported. So let's go and have a look. Head over to Services, and then you'll see that Dynamic DNS has been created. And then we want to go into Settings, and we want to hit the plus. And then we need to configure this with our registrar details. So, for example, you can click here for Service, and these are all of the different registrars that are supported. So for me, I would click on Cloudflare here. I would put in my username and my password. I would specify the zone that it's in, and then I would hit Save in the bottom. And with any luck, that should then go and pull my IP address. Once we've got dynamic DNS set up, we're in a good position to start hosting things. And one of the first things you'll probably want to host and have up and running is a VPN. So this will allow you to connect externally back into your network and do remote configuration, remote management, etc. Now, you can do this within OpnSense itself. And clicking on the VPN list here, you see a ton of different things that we can do. So most commonly is probably the OpnSense, which you can configure here. So create a new instance, create servers, clients, etc. But I recommend you leave this alone and use something like WireGuard. Now, again, there are multiple ways that you can use WireGuard. So I prefer to use this as a container within my Kubernetes environment, but there's nothing wrong with having this on the edge within your firewall. Because if your firewall goes down anyway, my solution wouldn't work. So it does make sense in some cases to have this on the firewall. So WireGuard isn't included as the default installation. So instead, we're going to have to go back to System, hit Firmware, and then we're going to have to go to Plugins. And thankfully, we can type in WireGuard, and we have two options. So the version I'm going to use is the OS WireGuard, but there is one that's written in Go. I've done a little bit of reading around this, and I think the OS WireGuard is the more stable version, or certainly the one that's been supported for the longest. So I'm going to install that. This might change in time, so do read up and do keep on top of things. So we're going to install that, and once that's installed, we should be able to go back to the VPN, and now we should see WireGuard as an option. So after giving the page a quick refresh, here's the WireGuard option. So pretty straightforward. We just want to click on Settings. Obviously, we want to enable WireGuard, so we'll hit Apply. Now that that's enabled, we've got some more options to do. So instances, we can create a new instance here. And this is going to create the actual server itself. And we need to specify a name, so I can call this one Test. We can generate a new public key pair, so I'm just going to do that for this video. Then we can specify the tunnel address. So I'm just going to choose something pretty standard. So I'm going to allow that paste. 10.10.10.1 and a /24. So that's going to give us 254 IP addresses we can use for WireGuard, which is way more than I need because it's only one person using it. Now the listen port, we probably want to do 51.820, which is the default UDP port for WireGuard. And we're going to leave the peers blank because we'll come back to that in a moment. So just hit save and then hit apply. So that's now created. And then we want to go to the peers. So these are the users that are going to be connecting to this. So we want to create a new user. So add. So to complete the peer, we're going to have to head back in because we need to copy this public key. So heading back to instances, let's hit the pencil. We're going to copy the public key. Then we're going to head back to peers, hit the plus, test user, paste in the public key here. So the allowed IPs are what it says on the tin. These are the IP addresses you're allowed to access when your WireGuard tunnel is open. So I usually put 0.0.0.0/0, so I can access anything when I'm authenticated. Now, because I do this in Kubernetes, my firewall can actually then restrict access, and I can also use things like network policies. But in OpnSense, this should give you access to everything. And I think you could put firewall rules on top of this to supersede this rule that we're going to create in a minute, which will give you that granular access again. Otherwise, you can just change the IP addresses in here and restrict that, but this is editable, and we'll get onto that on the peer in a moment. So once you've done that, you just want to hit save. And now you've created your peer. Over on your instance, you can click the command here and make sure that you specify your peer here. Now that's all set up, we need to assign this VPN to an interface. So we need to go to interface and then assignments. And we can see here now that we've got this new one here, WG1. So we're going to add this. And you can see now it's assigned as opt2 to the test interface. So hit save, and that's now created. And then we need to go into that assignment, so here, and we're going to want to enable it. And we're then going to have to set up some additional configurations. And it's probably a good idea to add the lock as well, so it can't be removed accidentally or without a warning interface. So now that that's done, we can hit save and then hit apply. And then that should now be up and running. Now, as we've got this configured at the moment, it will allow us to connect to local resources. But if you would like to connect to this and then be able to route out over the internet, you would need to create a NAT rule for that. So to do that, you'd have to go into Firewall and then click on NAT. And then obviously, as you're trying to connect to the internet, this would be an outbound rule. So here you will want to create a new outbound rule. And for it to work, you're going to need to select a hybrid NAT rule and then click save. Then you need to click apply. And then you'll see that here. So now that we've got this here under manual rules, we want to click add. And the interface is going to need to be the WAN because we want to route traffic out through the WAN over the internet. It's going to be IPv4. The protocol can be any because we want it to connect to anything over the internet. You could obviously restrict that if you wanted to. The source address needs to be the interface from earlier. So in my case, that was testnet. We're going to leave the destination address as any and the port as any, so it's going to be able to connect to anywhere on the internet. And that's pretty much all you need to configure on here. So we can go down to the bottom and we can hit save. Once we've hit save, we're obviously going to need to apply that. So let's hit apply. And then now that should be up and running. So when you connect to your WireGuard client, you should be able to have access to the internet through your home router. Now that's obviously useful because if you're out and about and you're on your mobile data, you don't have the protection of your firewall. If you now WireGuard home, you'll be able to access all of your local services remotely and also have the protection of OpnSense and things like having your Pi-hole work for you, so you've got remote ad blocking, which is pretty cool. Now that we've set that up, we need to create a firewall rule which will actually allow the traffic through the WAN interface. So to do that, we need to go back to the firewall and we need to create some rules. So this is a new rule on the WAN, and we want to click Add. And then in here, we want to have it passed. Quick means it's going to apply it immediately on a match, which is what we want. We want the WAN interface. Direction is in, so traffic hitting the WAN. The v4 is fine. The protocol, now we want to change this to UDP because WireGuard uses UDP. We're going to leave the source invert, the source, and the advanced all the same. The destination is going to be the WAN address, so we'll click that. So that's basically saying anything from anywhere hitting our WAN IP, i.e. our external IP address. And because we've set up dynamic DNS, that should always be up to date with a record on the domain registrar. The destination port should be WireGuard, so I've clicked Other and put in 51820. And then you can add a description if you want. So I'm going to hit Save, and then we're going to hit Apply. And now we've got that rule in place. So basically anything from anywhere hitting our WAN on port 51820 is going to be allowed through. So great, we should now be able to connect. And so the last thing you would need to do is set up the client. So if you head over to your mobile device, you download the WireGuard app, and then you just fill in the details that we've got here. And so as you can see on screen, I've got the Android WireGuard app, but it looks the same for pretty much all versions. And you need to populate it with the fields that we've created here. And now, as I mentioned, we could actually route some of our traffic over a VPN. Now, this is really useful if you have certain networks, maybe things like a guest network, whereby you want to make sure all of that traffic is routed over a VPN because you don't know exactly what people are going to be looking at. So to do that, we go back to the VPN section under OpenVPN and we select an OpenVPN client. Now, for this to work, you're going to have to download the configuration files for your VPN provider. Now, in my case, I use NordVPN, and all of their certificates and configuration files are available on their website. So I'm going to head over to there now, and I'm going to download those files. So when I head over to the website and I go to the /servers, the recommended server is this one here. So if I click that, I can download the OpenVPN configuration. So I'm going to click download the config. So now that configuration is downloaded, that's great. And if I open this up, the file we downloaded, you can see here all of the details, including the certificate. Don't worry if you can't read that, it's not that important. It's just the process that we need to follow. So now that we have these details, we need to add these certificates into OpnSense so that they can become trusted. So to do that, we need to head into System, we need to click on Trust, and then we need to go to Authorities. Now that we're in here, we need to add a new authority. So we're going to click plus, and I'm going to give this the name of NordVPN. And then in each respective area, the certificate data and the certificate private key, we need to take that from this file here. So with that data pasted, let's hit save. And now that that's saved, you can see it here. Now we can head over to VPN, OpenVPN, Clients, and we can create a new client. So we'll give this one a description of NordVPN, and you can even label the server if you want to. The server mode is fine as it is. The protocol I'm going to leave as UDP because it's faster. The device mode is going to be a tunnel. The interface is going to be any. Now the bit that we have to change is on the host or address. So in the host or address, we need to add the DNS name for this server. So if I load this up, you can see that on mine it's uk2528.nordvpn.co.uk. So I'm going to paste that in here, and the port is going to be 1194 for UDP. So that's okay. I'm going to set it to infinitely resolve this remote server, just so it keeps checking for that DNS record. And then we're going to need to add in our authentication. So populate these with your account details. You may need to specify an API key instead of your web login password. Just scrolling down, once we put our credentials in, we get to the cryptographic settings. Now we need to untick automatically generate, and we need to paste the content from here. Now I'll link the description below so that you've got access to this, but I'm just following the NordVPN instructions. So we're going to paste that into here. So that's that. The peer certificate authority is the one that we created earlier. The client certificate remains none. Now the encryption algorithm, we need to change this to be AES 256 GCM. And then the authorization digest algorithm needs to be SHA-512. Next, we need to go down to the tunnel settings. And we only need to make a couple of configuration changes. So under compression, we need to go to legacy, disable LZO algorithm. And we need to tick don't add or remove routes. Next, under the advanced configuration, we need to paste the following values. And these again are taken from the NordVPN website, and these will be different for each VPN provider. Now for verbosity of logging, I'm going to put a 3, which is the recommended, so that we can see some error messages. Now that we've got that, we can hit save. And we now need to assign this to an interface. Hopefully you're getting the gist of this. When you create a new network, you need to assign an interface. So going to interface and then assignments, you'll see that we've got the OpenVPN client here. So we're going to want to click add. And now you can see that it's added it here, opt3. Now clicking onto that, we want to enable the interface. And to make life easier, I'll just call this NordVPN. And then I'll click save. Next, we need to go into the services. And I'm going to go to the Unbound DNS. And I'm going to go to the general settings. I'm going to make a few changes here just so that this will work. Now, to see all of the options you need to change in here, you need to click the advanced mode, because the advanced mode changes the outgoing network interface. So make sure that it's enabled, make sure the port is 53, leave the network interfaces to all, disable DNSSEC support. We want registered DHCP static mappings. And then for the outgoing network type, we need to change it to the OpenVPN client, which is what we created earlier. Then once you've done that, you can hit save and we want to apply it. Next, we want to head into the advanced. We want to make sure that we hide identity. We want to hide version, prefetch DNS support, and then hit apply. Then we need to go to the firewall. We need to go to NAT, and then we need outbound rules. And we need to create a new hybrid NAT rule. So in here, we're going to click the plus, and we're just going to change the interface to be NordVPN, and then we're going to hit save, and then we're going to hit apply. Next, we're going to need to head into the firewall, the rules, and then the LAN, and we're going to delete the IPv6 rule because that won't work with NordVPN. Apply those changes. Next, we're going to edit the existing rule, and we're going to go down to the advanced section. So show those, and then within here, what we need to change is the gateway. So on here, we want to choose NordVPN VPN v4. Then we hit save. And so you can see that that's now here. We'll hit apply. Then we need to add a new rule. It needs to be a pass. And we're going to change the source to be the LAN. So that's this one here. And the destination is also going to be the LAN. Then we're going to save and apply that. And the final thing we now need to do is to change the DNS settings for when we're on this. So to do that, we need to go to System. Then we need to go to Settings, and then we need to go to General. And we're going to need to change these DNS IP addresses here, which are currently set to my Pi-hole, because that's not accessible through NordVPN. So for NordVPN, I need to put in this value here, and also this secondary DNS value here. And now we need to scroll down and make sure that these DNS server options are unticked. They should be by default, and then hit save. And then I promise we're nearly on the last part now. Then we need to go to System, and then we need to go to Gateways. Then we need to go to Single, and then the NordVPN v6, we want to disable this one here. So edit that, click the tick, and then click Save. Make sure we apply it. Next, we should be able to go to VPN, OpnSense, and then connection status. And we should see that this is now up and connected. Excellent. And now, voila. You can see that I'm accessing the internet over NordVPN. Now, if you're having issues with DNS resolution, you might need to go into your LAN DHCP, which is here, and remove the DNS servers we specified, because those, if you remember, were your internal DNS. If you remove those, it's going to fall back to the ones that we just specified within the system and then the general. And so now if I go to what's my IP, hopefully it doesn't show my actual IP address. And yes, here you can see my IP address of 91. And then 167 at the end, which is a NordVPN IP address. It's not mine. So that means now that anything that I put onto this LAN network is going to be routed through a VPN. That's pretty awesome. You don't have to have a client now on every host on that network. The next thing we're going to touch on is to enable intrusion detection. So this should hopefully help to keep the bad guys out. So to do that, we're going to go onto the services. We're going to go to intrusion detection and we're going to hit the administration page. The first thing we're going to want to do is enable it. And we're also going to want to turn on the IPS mode, intrusion prevention service. So for those unfamiliar, IDS and IPS are two similar but different concepts. The IDS is the detection part and the IPS is the prevention part. So one detects and one prevents. Now you can also enable this in promiscuous mode, and promiscuous mode will listen to all network traffic on that interface. So put this on or off depending on what you want to scan. I'll turn this on for now. The interface that I'm primarily concerned about is obviously the WAN, because that's where traffic is leaving my network and going out and also coming into my network. So from a risk-based perspective, this is the most untrusted network. It's the internet. So you could also add this to your local network if you wanted to, but I'm just going to put this on the WAN. And so with that configured, I'm just going to hit apply. So now that that's enabled, it's not actually doing anything. And that's because we don't have any rules. So you can see on the download tab, we want to update and download some rules. So you need to determine in here which rules you want to download. There might be very specific ones that you have in mind for a specific service or type of attack that you want to protect against. If you're going to do what I'm doing now, so selecting them all, clicking download and update those rules, and then clicking enable, you're probably going to run into some problems or some unideal behavior because these rule sets are probably overly restrictive. So do be careful which ones you're adding. It's not a case of more is better. You just need to select the ones that make sense for you. Now, I haven't got time to go through all of these rule sets, and many of these things are very advanced in terms of what they're doing. So now that those have all been downloaded, you can see that they're also enabled. So the next thing we need to do is set up some rules. And you can see by default, it's created alerts for all of these types of rules. So I'm not going to check those, but feel free to have a run through and have a look. And you can see here that there's specific rules for things like a Cisco Telnet buffer overflow. And there'll be a whole host more stuff in here. And if you're really interested in all the security stuff and some of those attacks and CVEs, etc., have a look through those and then compare those to some of the NIST vulnerability databases. Once you've done that, you can also create some user-defined rules that are on top of that. I'm not going to cover that in this video. And then on the alerts tab, this is where you'll see alerts for when one of those rules has been triggered. So if something is trying to access one of your services or it detects anything malicious within the packets, it will generate an alert here that you can look at and then respond to. So now we're coming to the end of the video, and I appreciate this is a hell of a lot to take in. And believe me, it's been a long time in the making. So now we've got static hosts and IP addresses. We've learned how to create networks. We've also learned how to create firewall rules and VLANs, and we've demonstrated that we can create rules to both split traffic and then enable it. We've also set up a VPN inwards, and we've set up a VPN outwards, so we can route an entire subnet out over a VPN, which is awesome. And the last thing we probably want to do now is to back up our configuration, because we don't want to lose this. So let's get on to that. So conveniently, this functionality is built into OpnSense, and you can find it in Systems, Configuration, Backups. So how many do we want to save? I'm going to save 5. And I've clicked Save. And you can also then download this configuration, so you can do this manually. So if I click Download Configuration, here you can see it's downloaded it for me. Now, there's also a really handy method that you can do here with Google Drive. So you can actually integrate this process into your Google Drive so that it will automatically back up this configuration into your Google Drive. I'm not going to show that in this video, but I'll link it in the description below. Importantly, this then gives you the ability to restore a configuration. So, i.e., when you're installing this for the first time, you can either do it through the initial installation wizard, or if at any time later you've made an error, you've still got access to your OpnSense, you can choose the file from here, and then you can hit that restore configuration button. And with any luck, you should be back up and running. So a huge thank you if you've managed to stay all the way through this video. There's been a lot of technical stuff in there, and for many of you, this will be the first time you're setting up and configuring OpnSense. I hope all of this made sense. If it didn't, please drop a comment or hop into our Discord and we can help you out. And I hope this remains relevant for the near future. If anything significant does change, I'll come back and redo some of these videos. But anyway, I need to get some sleep now. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you found this useful, and I'll catch you on the next video. Take care, everybody.